Hey everyone! Today we're stepping back far, really far, into the world of the first Americans, the Paleo-Indians. These were people living at the very edge of the Ice Age, chasing mammoths across frozen plains, foraging through wild forests, and figuring out how to make a life in a land that didn't yet have a name. Before we get started, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I'm doing here. And in the comments, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. I love seeing this little community of ours stretch across the globe, connecting from so many places. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's settle in for today's journey together. Close your eyes and imagine this. You are standing at the edge of a continent that doesn't yet have a name. The wind bites at your skin, carrying the smell of salt and ice, and the distant sound of something massive, something alive, moving in the snow. Behind you, an endless white horizon stretches back toward the land you came from. Ahead, forests rise like dark teeth from the frozen mist. Your breath turns to steam, your feet ache in their crude hide wrappings, and every step feels like a gamble between survival and oblivion. You are among the first humans to set foot here. No maps. No roads. No promises. Just a vast, untamed wilderness at the end of the Ice Age. Somewhere in that darkness, mammoths graze. Saber-toothed cats watch from the tree-line. Rivers cut through frozen valleys, carrying the last whispers of a melting world. And you? You are here to live, or die, by your wits, your tools, and your unyielding will. This is not yet America. It is a raw and wild place, where survival is a story written in footprints, stone blades, and the smoke of a campfire curling into a glacial sky. Welcome to the world of the Paleo-Indians. Before nations, before cities, before history itself, this was life at the edge of the world. Imagine waking to the sound of wind. Not the gentle kind that rattles a window or brushes the leaves in a backyard, but a vast, unbroken current sweeping across miles of open steppe. It's a sound you can feel in your ribs, steady and endless, a reminder that here, on the edge of the world, the wind is as constant as breath. You crawl from beneath your furs, pulling them close as the cold bites at your skin. The air smells faintly of smoke from the banked embers of last night's fire, mixed with the salt of a distant sea. Around you, the camp begins to stir. A child fusses. Someone coughs and adds a fistful of dried grass to the coals. In the dim light, you see them all, your people, wrapped in hides, faces creased by the same cold that gnaws at you. This place is neither fully Asia nor the America that will one day exist. It is Beringia, though no one here calls it that. To you, it is simply land, a windswept bridge between worlds, a place your people have learned to live in, not just pass through. The journey that brought you here wasn't a single bold leap. It was a slow drift, measured not in days but in generations. The ice sheets behind you grew and receded like restless giants, forcing your people onward, southward, into whatever new places the world would allow. You didn't come here chasing a destination. You came following the herds, mammoths, caribou, bison, creatures that sustain you and lead you like moving landmarks across the frozen earth. And though you may not know it, you are part of something much larger than your own steps. In the far future, people will argue about this crossing. They will measure the bones you leave behind, test the soil for traces of your fires, and wonder when exactly you came, 20,000 years ago. More? They will speak of coastal routes and ice-free corridors, and debate whether some of your ancestors paddled south along the edges of the Pacific, skimming the shorelines in skin boats. But here, none of that matters. You don't need maps or theories. You follow the land, the seasons, the hunger in your stomach, and the pull of the horizon. That has always been enough. You shoulder your spear and step outside the camp. The sky is gray, heavy with the promise of snow, but in the distance you can see the curve of the land, open plains rolling away until they meet the shadow of forests, and beyond them, the glimmer of ice. This is no narrow strip of frozen earth. This is a continent between continents, larger than some of the nations that will one day rise and fall here. In summer, it is a sea of grasses, wildflowers bursting in brief defiance of the cold. In winter, It is endless white, punctuated by the silhouettes of trees and the great dark humps of moving herds. The air hums with life. Musk oxen graze in the distance, their breath rising like smoke. Arctic foxes slink between drifts of snow, watching for a meal. Far off, the slow shapes of mammoths cross the horizon, too distant to threaten you, but close enough that you can imagine the tremor of their steps through the earth. And always there is the ice. It hangs at the edge of your vision like a wall built by the gods themselves, glaciers taller than any tree, older than any memory. Sometimes you wonder if they are alive. You and your people survive here through patience and precision. It isn't enough to simply want to live, you must know how. The mammoth, towering and rich with meat and fat, is the prize every hunter dreams of, but it is also death waiting on 4 legs. So you hunt the smaller things more often. Hares, birds, fish pulled from icy streams with hands numbed by cold water. In summer, you dig for roots, gather berries, dry and smoke whatever you can for the long winters to come. Your tools are simple, but they are miracles in their own right. Blades chipped from stones so sharp they can flay flesh with a single cut. Spears tipped with fluted points. Later generations will call them clovis, though to you they are simply what works. The outlaw, a carved lever that lets you throw those spears farther, harder, faster than you ever could with just your arm. Your camp moves with the seasons. When the salmon run, you follow the rivers. When the herds migrate, you pack the hides and poles of your shelters, sling them across your backs, and walk. Home isn't a place. It's the circle of people around a fire, the smell of roasting meat, the hum of voices sharing what they've learned today. And at night, when the wind presses against the tents and the world feels too big to survive, you sit close to the flames. You listen as the elders speak, of the animals that give themselves so your people may live, of spirits who walk between the worlds of ice and sky, of why you must keep moving, always moving. It's easy for those who come long after to think of you as primitive. But they've never stitched a boot from caribou hide that could carry them across a frozen plain without losing their toes. They've never built a shelter from bones and hides that could stand against the storm. They've never had to learn, from nothing but experience, how to outweigh beasts that weigh 10 times what they do. Your people are not merely surviving. They are experimenting, innovating. Every stitch in a garment, every curve of a spear point, every chosen campsite is the result of generations of trial, error, and memory. Knowledge here is survival. It is shared around the fire like meat. It is passed to the young not as suggestion but as law. Because in this world, ignorance is extinction. Sometimes, when the fire burns low and the wind howls through the cracks in the tent, you wonder, why? Why leave the familiar for this? Why walk into lands where the sun sets at strange angles, where the beasts are larger than any story, where the cold seems determined to turn your blood to ice? Maybe the answer is simple. Because you must. Because the herds move and you must follow. Because hunger leaves no choice. Because the world behind you, the one your ancestors knew, is no longer enough. Or maybe it's deeper than that. Maybe it's the thing that has always made us human, the quiet, restless belief that something better waits beyond the horizon. You rise from the fire, spear in hand, breath steaming in the cold. Somewhere in the distance, a mammoth trumpets, a sound that seems to shake the earth itself. The wind shifts. The sky darkens. You take a step forward. It is a small step, but it will echo for thousands of years. And so, your people walk. Not in days or weeks, but in generations. Each step carrying you farther south, into a world reshaped by ice and time. And what waits for you there will be unlike anything you've known, a land of giants, of predators, of peril and promise in equal measure. Come, let us walk into Ice Age America, and see what your footsteps will find. The land changes beneath your feet. Slowly at first. Subtly. But over the years, and for your people, years mean generations, the shape of the world softens. You no longer live only in the wide open steppes of Beringia. The horizon breaks. Rolling plains give way to stands of spruce and birch, then to vast forests where the trees close in and the wind whispers instead of roars. The air smells different here, still sharp with cold, but tinged with the resin of evergreens and the musk of animals you've never hunted before. And you can hear them. A low rumble, distant but growing, that feels more like a tremor in your bones than a sound in your ears. The first time you feel it, you grip your spear without thinking. Your people call them many things: great beasts, the ancient ones, the food that walks like a mountain. But one word will carry them forward into the memories of those who come long after: mammoth. This is the late Pleistocene, the closing chapters of the Ice Age. It is a world both alien and familiar, a version of North America that feels like a dream you can almost wake from. The creatures here are unlike anything you've seen. Imagine standing on a ridge at dawn and watching them move across the valley, mammoths, great and shaggy, their tusks curling toward the sky like crescent moons. Mastodons, shorter and stockier cousins, rooting through forests for twigs and leaves. Giant ground sloths slumbering through thickets, taller than a man when they rear up, armed with claws that could fell a tree. Glyptodons, armadillo-like giants the size of small cars, grazing lazily on low plants, their domed shells glinting in the weak sunlight. And they are not alone. Bison so large they make the modern ones look like calves. Horses in herds that churn the plains into dust. Camels, yes camels, grazing in the shadow of glaciers. And watching them, always watching, are the predators. Saber-toothed cats, whose jaws hold teeth longer than your hand. Dire wolves, heavier and hungrier than any wolf you've known, running in packs that darken the snow. And the rarest terror, the American lion, a beast larger than any lion that will ever live again, a shadow that passes silently through the trees. You are not at the top of this food chain. You are part of it. There is an old man in your camp who still remembers the first time your people brought down a mammoth. His voice cracks as he tells it, a sound like dry leather, but his eyes still burn with the memory. "It was like killing a god," he says. You believe him. Hunting something that weighs 6 tons is no casual task. It is ritual, strategy, and desperation rolled into one. You do not simply throw a spear and hope. You plan. You wait. Your hunters work together, calling to one another in low, urgent whistles. You drive the herd toward a narrow pass, a riverbank, a patch of ground where its massive feet will slip. Every detail matters: the wind, the slope of the earth, the number of hands holding spears. And then, when the moment comes, you strike. Screams fill the air, human and animal alike. Spears tipped with fluted stone points pierce thick hides. The ground shakes. Blood steams against the snow. You know that at least one of you may not walk away from this. But if you succeed, if the beast falls, it is more than a kill. It is life for the whole camp. The mammoth gives more than meat. Its bones become tools, tent frames, even flutes for making music. Its hide becomes shelter, shoes, warmth against the endless cold. Even its fat is precious, fuel for fires that must never go out. Every part of it is used. Every life it gives is honored. But most days, you don't bring down giants. More often, you live off smaller, quieter hunts: rabbits caught in snares, fish speared in icy streams, wildfowl brought down with darts. You dig roots from the frozen ground, pluck berries when the short summer blooms. You dry strips of meat into jerky, grind nuts into coarse meal, smoke fish over slow fires so it will last through the long nights of winter. The kill is only one part of the story. The greater skill is knowing what to eat, when, and how to make it last. Because hunger isn't a single event here. It's a shadow that follows you. It waits in the lean months, in the years when herds vanish or rivers freeze too early. It is patient. And if you make one mistake, if you misjudge a season or fail to store enough for the cold, it will claim you. Centuries later, archaeologists will uncover the remains of your camps: bone needles, fluted spear points, the blackened rings of ancient fire pits. They will give them names like Clovis and Folsom, as if naming them could make them theirs. But here, now, they are simply your tools. And they are your survival. The Clovis point is your signature: long, thin, carefully fluted so it can pierce deep and be reshaped if broken. It is as much art as weapon, the result of hands that learn to listen to stone, to feel the way it wants to break, to coax it into sharpness rather than force it. The otlotl, that curious lever of bone or wood, is another quiet revolution. With it, you can send a spear flying farther, faster, with enough force to bring down even the largest prey. You do not yet know it, but these small innovations are what make your people unstoppable. The hunt ends, the sun falls, and you return to camp. Your people gather around the fire, that small circle of light in a continent of darkness. The smoke stings your eyes, but it also keeps the night at bay. The children huddle near their mothers, chewing on scraps of roasted marrow. The hunters clean their weapons with quiet pride. The elders speak in low voices, telling stories of the world as it was, of the animals who gave themselves so you might live, of the spirits that dwell in the places beyond the ice. You listen, not just for entertainment, but for survival. These stories are maps, of rivers you have not yet seen, of lands where food is plenty or danger is certain, of mistakes you must never make. And maybe, in the soft moments before sleep, someone begins to sing, a low, rhythmic chant that carries through the smoke and settles into the bones. This is how you learn what it means to be human. Step back for a moment. What we're seeing here isn't just a band of hunters scratching out an existence. It is the earliest known chapter of the human story in the Americas, a chapter written not in words but in footprints, fire pits, and stone. When we look back at these people, we tend to see them as anonymous figures in fur, wandering the tundra like ghosts. But this is wrong. They were as real and as complicated as we are. They argued. They laughed. They feared. They dreamed. And slowly, step by step, they remade a continent. The path stretches on. Some of your people stay, content in the lands they've made their own. But others keep walking. Through the ice-free corridors that open between glaciers. Along the coastlines, hugging the edge of the sea. Across rivers swollen with meltwater, through valleys where the mammoths graze, into forests where the air is thick with the smell of pine and earth. And with every step, the land changes. The air grows warmer. The days stretch longer. The animals shift, fewer mammoths, more bison. Fewer dire wolves, more coyotes. This is no longer the bridge between worlds. It is a new world entirely. You pause at the crest of a hill, looking down at the plains below. The sun is setting, staining the ice and grass with a strange, golden light. Somewhere far off, you hear the call of a wolf. It feels different here. Like the land is waiting. You grip your spear tighter. And you keep walking. But the ice age is not still. It is shifting, melting, changing. And soon, this new world will transform yet again. The glaciers will retreat. The great herds will vanish. And the people, the first Americans, will be forced to adapt, or be lost to history. Next, let us walk with them into the age of melting ice, and see how a world at the edge of extinction reshaped them forever. Imagine walking back to camp at dusk after a long, cold hunt. The air is sharp, the kind that stings your nostrils and makes every breath taste like snow. Your legs ache, your hands are numb around the spear you carry, but then it hits you. The smell. Wood smoke, rich and earthy, drifting through the still air. The crackle of a fire you can't yet see. And beneath it, the unmistakable scent of meat, roasting, sizzling, dripping fat onto hot stones with a hiss that makes your stomach twist with hunger. You know before you arrive that someone brought in food. Not just a handful of roots or dried fish from the cache, real food. And for a people who walk the edge between feast and famine every day, that means everything. Let's clear something up. When we think of Paleo-Indians, our minds jump to dramatic scenes, a band of hunters driving a mammoth off a cliff, spears flying, triumphant shouts echoing across a frozen valley. And yes, those moments happened. But the truth? Those were rare. Killing a mammoth or mastodon was the prehistoric equivalent of winning the lottery. Most days, survival looked far less cinematic. Dinner might be a rabbit caught in a snare, its tiny body stretched across a spit. Or a string of fish pulled from an icy stream, shimmering as they're gutted and smoked for storage. Maybe even insects, a protein-packed snack that future archaeologists won't bother writing poems about, but which kept stomachs from growling. The people who first walked the Americas didn't eat like kings. They ate like survivors, and survivors eat what they can get. Big game hunting wasn't abandoned just because it was dangerous. In fact, the largest animals provided the highest reward. Mammoths, mastodons, giant bison, one successful kill could feed an entire band for weeks, even months if preserved correctly. But getting one wasn't simple. Your people traveled in small groups, coordinating like clockwork. Hunters learned the terrain, watched for weak animals, used wind and landscape to their advantage. They didn't run blindly at a mammoth, they planned. Drove it toward marshy ground where its weight would trap it, or into a narrow pass where spears could strike from all sides. It wasn't just hunting. It was war, a battle of wit and nerve fought with sharpened stone and desperate hope. And when one of those giants fell, it was more than a meal. It was a victory worth telling around the fire for generations. Not every band lived near Mammoth Country, though. Some followed the coastlines and rivers, where the bounty came not on four legs but on fins. Salmon runs were the stuff of legend, shimmering, writhing rivers of life that arrived with the seasons, turning streams into easy pickings for those who knew when and where to wait. With sharpened stakes or woven basket traps, your people plucked fish from the water, smoked them over low fires, and dried them into leathery strips for storage. Seafood wasn't just survival food, it was portable. Perfect for the constant movement of a people who couldn't settle down, not yet. And those living along the ancient Pacific coastlines likely enjoyed shellfish too, clams, mussels, crabs, though they probably didn't have the luxury of butter and lemon. Hunting was glamorous. Foraging was reliable. While the hunters stalked bison or fished in icy streams, others in the group dug for roots, peeled bark for its nutrients, and gathered berries during the fleeting summers. Seasonal knowledge was survival. You needed to know which plants healed and which killed, which mushrooms you could chew and which would make you hallucinate yourself into a ravine. Wild onions, cattails, acorns, seeds, they all found their way into the cook fires. And though no one in your band had a recipe, you can imagine the flavor, earthy, smoky, and just this side of edible. This wasn't the age of Michelin stars. It was the age of not dying before winter. Your people didn't have pots or pans as we know them, but they had creativity. Cooking often meant stone boiling, heating smooth river rocks in a fire, then dropping them into hide-lined pits or baskets filled with water and food. The stones hissed and steamed, cooking roots, fish, and meat without burning them. Flat rocks near the fire made for excellent griddles, where meat sizzled, fat dripped, and the air filled with the smell of something worth living another day for. For longer storage, meat was smoked or dried into jerky, light and tough but life-saving when food grew scarce. Fat was rendered into tallow, mixed with dried berries and pulverized meat into dense, calorie-packed travel food, an early form of what we might recognize as pemmican. No one here ate 3 meals a day. You ate when you could, as much as you could, because tomorrow the herds might vanish. When the hunt was good, there was feasting, enough meat and marrow to fill every belly, enough fat to warm every fire. When it was bad, you tightened your belt. You scraped marrow from bones already cracked and emptied. You chewed dried roots like leather. You prayed to whatever spirits you believed might listen. The line between plenty and hunger was thin, and everyone knew it. But even in famine, there was sharing. Food wasn't private. It wasn't mine and yours. It was ours. A mammoth kill wasn't dragged off to one family's fire. It was cut, divided, and distributed. The old got their share. The children got their share. Even those too injured to hunt received a piece. Why? Because no one survived alone. Every bite carried an unspoken truth. Today you might be the one with the spear, but tomorrow you could be the one by the fire, waiting. And in a world this fragile, generosity wasn't charity. It was insurance. Step back and look at this for a moment. These foodways, the hunts, the foraging, the smoking, the sharing, weren't just survival tactics. They were culture. They were knowledge passed down in stories, shaped into rituals, embedded in the daily rhythm of life. To eat was to live. But to share? That was to be human. You leaned back from the fire, belly full of roasted fish and wild roots. Above you, the stars spread like crushed bone against the black sky. Tomorrow will bring another hunt, another long walk, another question of where the next meal will come from. But for tonight you are warm. You are fed. You are alive. And that is enough. But food was only part of survival. To truly endure this new world, you needed people, family, bands, networks of trust stitched together across a dangerous landscape. Next, we step into their homes, or what passed for them, and discover what family and social life looked like at the edge of the Ice Age. The sun has long since sunk behind the horizon, leaving only a ribbon of cold light where the world meets the sky. In its place, the fire burns, a stubborn, flickering heart at the center of your people. This is what home means. Not walls. Not permanence. But a circle of faces around a flame. The shelters are simple, low hide tents braced with wooden poles or, when luckier, framed with the bones of giants, mammoths who gave their lives long before you arrived. They huddle close together for warmth, each one little more than a stitched-together skin against the endless cold. Inside, it's crowded, and that's the point. Children curl up between parents for heat. Elders rest near the entrance, half by tradition, half by necessity. If danger comes, they are the first to hear it. You can't stretch your legs without bumping into someone. Privacy? That's a word the Ice Age hasn't invented yet. So who are these people you live with? Modern archaeologists call them bands. Small, mobile groups of maybe 20 to 50 people, big enough to share the work, small enough to feed from a single hunt. But to you, they are more than numbers. They are family, though not always by blood. Some are parents and siblings, yes. But others are allies, friends, wanderers who joined your group somewhere along the way. Kingship isn't always about who you're related to. It's about who shares the fire with you. And this network, flexible, adaptive, forged in survival, is what keeps you alive. There are no houses here, no neat divisions of labor written into law. But roles emerge shaped by need. Hunters, often younger men, though women surely joined when skill or necessity demanded, stalk the big game. Foragers, often women and older members, gather roots, berries, and wood, their baskets as essential as the hunter's spears. Elders? They are the living libraries. They remember the paths the herds take, the plants that heal or poison, the stories that keep the young from making the same fatal mistakes. And the children, well, the children learn by watching. Every game of make-believe with a toy spear is practice. Every chore, from scraping hides to carrying firewood, prepares them for the day when survival depends on their hands. It isn't rigid. It can't be. In a world this harsh, everyone wears many hats, sometimes literally, stitched from animal hide. Now let's step back. Anthropologists love to talk about gender roles in early societies, as if Ice Age people were quietly organizing themselves into neat little categories. But the truth is messier. Yes, hunting big game was likely dominated by men, for sheer practical reasons, endurance, muscle, and the grim statistics of risk. But that doesn't mean women weren't hunters. They were, especially for smaller game, or when the hunt demanded all hands. And while foraging may sound less glamorous than bringing down a mammoth, it often provided most of the calories your group consumed. The quiet work of digging roots or drying meat was no less vital than driving a spear into a bison. In short, if you were hoping for an Ice Age version of stay-at-home moms versus breadwinners, you're out of luck. Survival didn't care about your job title. Now imagine you're a child here. You wake not in your own room but between your parents on a bed of hides and furs, the smell of smoke and tallow in your nose. Your first tasks are simple. Gather twigs, help your mother scrape a hide, maybe carry a message to the hunters at the river. No one hands you a schedule. No one tells you, class starts at 9. Your school is the camp, your teachers are the entire band. You learn by doing, by following, by listening to the stories your elders tell around the fire, stories that double as instructions for how not to die. And childhood ends quickly. By the time you can throw a spear straight or dig a root without help, you're no longer a child. You're part of the band's survival. And yes, you still probably got scolded for not doing your chores. Some things are eternal. After the work is done, after the meat is cooked and the hides stretched and the tools sharpened, there's the fire. This is when the stories come out. Not just entertainment, though there's laughter, even in this cold world. These are maps in narrative form. Myths that teach you which rivers are dangerous, which animals are sacred, which places to avoid when the moon is dark. Maybe someone tells of the first mammoth, the one who gave itself so that people might live. Or of the spirits that walk between the worlds, unseen but watching. Or of the ancestors who first crossed the ice, braver than anyone alive. The children listen wide-eyed. The adults nod in quiet agreement. Even the skeptic stays silent. Because in this world, stories aren't just stories. They're how you carry the past forward. But it's not all warmth and harmony. Sometimes bands clash, over hunting grounds, over resources, over insults that grew teeth in the cold. A stolen cache of dried meat, a poached herd, an argument that spirals into violence. And yet, there is also connection. Groups meet and trade, flint for obsidian, meat for furs, knowledge for knowledge. Sometimes these meetings lead to alliances. Sometimes they lead to new families, new blood mingling with the old. It's a fragile network, stitched together by trust and necessity. But in the vast, dangerous silence of this land, that network is everything. Step back. It's easy to see these people as wandering hunters, but look closer and you'll find something universal. They built homes, even if those homes moved. They raised children, mourned their dead, told stories that gave meaning to their lives. Strip away the mammoth hides and the stone tools, and you'd recognize them. Their worries, their hopes, their need for connection, they are not so different from us. In the end, family wasn't just who shared your blood. It was who kept your fire burning. You lay down at last, the fire still crackling, the night still alive with the occasional cry of wolves in the distance. Someone shifts beside you in the dark, another human warmth against the unending cold. Tomorrow you'll move again. But for now, this circle of faces, this fragile web of kin and companions, it is enough. It is home. But in a world this raw, family wasn't just for warmth and work. It was the foundation of something deeper, belief. Next, we step into the quiet world of their rituals, their burials, their whispered prayers to the unseen. The fire pops and hisses as sap bursts from the wood, casting sparks into the night like fleeting stars. You sit close, pulling your hide tighter, listening as an elder begins to speak. The wind outside howls across the open plain, but here, in this circle of light, the world feels smaller. Safer. Once, the elder says, their voice low and steady, the earth was only ice. And the people lived with the animals, and there was no death. But then the first mammoth gave itself so that we might eat, and in doing so, it made a path for us across the ice. You've heard this one before. Everyone has. But you lean in anyway, because stories are more than words. They are the shape of the world. The elder continues. The mammoth said, "Take from me only what you need. And when you walk this new land, remember that it is alive. The rivers see. The mountains watch. The wind carries the voices of those who came before." The story lingers in the smoke and silence. It is not just entertainment. It is a promise. To live in this world is to be surrounded by forces larger than yourself. The animals you hunt, the rivers you cross, the strange and terrible sky above, they are not things. They are beings. You cannot afford to see the mammoth as mere meat. You cannot treat the bison as faceless prey. They are part of the same cycle that feeds you, teaches you, watches you. And so you speak to them, in your stories, in your rituals, perhaps even in whispered words before the hunt. You give thanks when they fall, knowing they gave themselves so you may live. The earth is not dead matter. It breathes. It listens. Modern archaeologists dig into the soil and find their proof: graves. Carefully buried bodies, sometimes sprinkled with red ochre, a mineral the color of blood and sunrise. To them, this is evidence of belief, a sign that the dead were not discarded but honored. To you, standing in this ancient camp, it is more than evidence. It is love. It is duty. When someone dies, they are not left for the wolves. They are placed in the earth with care. A favorite tool might be tucked beside them. A necklace of bone or shell rests on their chest. Ochre stains their skin, as if painting them for a journey. You do this not because it's custom, but because they are not gone. They are walking somewhere beyond the horizon, and you are sending them off with what they'll need. In every band there is one who listens differently. When others hear only wind, they hear voices. When others see only the shifting flames, they see messages. The healer, the dreamer, the one who walks between the living and the dead, the shaman. They know which plants cure fever and which bring visions. They speak to the unseen, perhaps in trance, perhaps in dreams. They are feared, and they are needed. And when the time comes to hunt the great beasts, or to bury a loved one, it is the shaman who leads the rites, singing, chanting, painting the living with ochre and ash so that the spirits take notice. When you sleep, you do not simply rest. You travel. Dreams are more than idle images. They are messages. From the animals you hunt. From the ancestors who watch. From powers you do not name but feel in your bones. A dream of falling might warn of danger. A dream of fire might bring courage or caution. And when the shaman dreams, the whole band listens. Perhaps it was a dream that told your people where to go when the ice began to melt. Perhaps it was a dream that first showed them the mammoth crossing the great waters. Step out of the circle for a moment. What we call belief was not an extra layer of life for these people. It was life. They had no wall between the sacred and the ordinary. The animals they hunted were part of the divine. The rivers they crossed held spirits. The dead were not gone. They had simply moved out of sight. When archaeologists uncover a burial painted with ochre, or a carved ivory figurine buried with a hunter, they see artifacts. But those who placed them there? They saw continuity, the thin, unbroken thread between this world and the next. The elder's voice falls silent. The fire crackles, throwing shadows against the hide walls. Tomorrow you will hunt again. You will walk across the ice and through the forests, always moving, always searching. But tonight, as you drift towards sleep, you feel it, the presence of those who walked before you, of the animals who watch from the dark, of a world alive and awake. And for a moment, you are not just one small figure in the wilderness. You are part of something vast. But belief alone could not keep them alive. These people still had to move, to track the herds, to find their way across a continent that seemed endless. Next, we follow them as they walk through seasons, across rivers, along the pathways that carried them deeper into the heart of the Americas. You wake before dawn. Not because you want to, but because the world requires it. The fire has burned down to embers, the night air bites through your hide covering, and somewhere in the dark, the hunters are already whispering. It's time to move. There is no door to lock behind you, no house to return to. When your people travel, they take everything, the tents of hide and bone, the tools, the dried meat and smoked fish, the memories of the last camp. It all fits on backs and sleds, parceled out among every able hand. And then you walk. Movement isn't an event for your people. It is a way of life. You follow the herds, mammoths, bison, caribou, animals whose migrations are as predictable as the changing of the seasons. You know their paths, their rhythms, where they cross rivers and graze on fresh spring grasses. When the salmon return to the rivers, you move to the water. When the berries ripen, you shift to the lowlands. When winter bares its teeth, you find shelter in valleys and forests, places where the wind cannot reach so easily. It is a kind of dance, learned through generations of watching the land. Each new camp begins with fire. Always fire. It is coaxed back to life from the embers carried in ash bundles, or struck from flint and steel. Without it, nothing else works, not the cooking, not the warmth, not the warding off of night. Then come the shelters. Simple, fast. Hide tents lashed over poles, or domed huts framed with mammoth bones if you're lucky enough to have them. They rise quickly because they must. A camp might last a week, maybe 2. Sometimes just a single night. And then it's gone, leaving little behind but footprints, scattered ash, and the gnawed bones of your last meal. Home is not a place. It is wherever the fire burns. Step back for a moment. This was not wandering for wandering's sake. This was survival strategy written into the very structure of life. Paleo-Indian groups were nomadic out of necessity, chasing seasonal resources, avoiding overhunting, staying ahead of harsh weather. Modern archaeology has found their traces scattered like breadcrumbs. Temporary campsites, stone tool workshops, kill sites where entire herds were brought down and butchered. Each one is a frozen moment in their long, slow march across a continent. If you want to understand how they moved, look to the rivers. In an age before maps, waterways were highways. They told you where the animals drank, where the fish spawned, where you could find soft ground for camp and wood for fires. Sometimes, the rivers were kind. Sometimes they were swollen, treacherous, cold enough to freeze your breath in your chest. Crossing them meant more than wet feet, it could mean death. But you did it anyway, because on the other side, there was always the promise of more food, more safety, more life. The rivers carried you forward. And you were not alone. Other bands walked these lands, other fires burned in the distance. Sometimes you met them by chance, at a salmon run, at a crossing point where paths converged. What happened next? It depended. Perhaps there was trade, a finely flaked blade exchanged for furs, dried meat for obsidian brought from far-off mountains. Knowledge traded hands too, warnings about dangerous rivers, rumors of herds, the memory of where food had once been plentiful. Sometimes, though, there was conflict. Too many people in one place, not enough to go around. A poached herd. An insult that festered in the cold. Violence wasn't constant, but it lurked in the background, a reminder that survival often left little room for diplomacy. But whether in peace or tension, these meetings were proof of something larger. This was not an empty world. It was alive with other people like you. The landscape itself becomes your teacher. You learn to read the sky, to know when storms are coming, to track the shadows of birds circling overhead, a sign of carcasses, or predators, nearby. To watch for the patterns in the grass where herds pass, the way broken branches mark trails through dense wood. Every step teaches you something. And every mistake costs more than you want to pay. You walk for hours each day, sometimes days on end. The ground shifts beneath you, frozen plains become muddy lowlands, then forests so thick you must carve paths with stone axes. There are no trails, not really, just the faintest memory of those who walked here before. A cairn of stones left by another band, a charred stump where someone else's fire once burned. But you keep walking. Because stopping too long means starving. It's tempting to picture these journeys as chaotic or aimless, but the truth is more impressive. They were navigators, reading landmarks, memorizing seasons, using the stars when they could. Some followed the ice-free corridors that opened between glaciers. Others hugged the coastlines, traveling by foot and possibly in simple skin-covered boats. They carried not just themselves but their knowledge, passed from mouth to ear, parent to child, band to band. That was their compass. And slowly, generation by generation, those paths spread like veins across a continent. At last, after miles of mud and stone, you arrive somewhere that feels right. The ground is dry, the river is close, the trees give shelter from the wind. The tents go up. The fire is lit. Someone starts to scrape hides while others go to gather wood. Children laugh, chasing one another around the edges of the camp. It looks temporary because it is. But for tonight it is home. You settle near the fire, stretching sore feet toward the flames. The stars come out, one by one, scattered across the endless black. Tomorrow, you'll walk again. But for now you rest. But for all their skill and resilience, the first Americans lived in a world that was always dangerous. The predators, the storms, the sicknesses, and, at times, each other. Next, we step into the shadow of those dangers. The predators that stalk them, the disasters that chase them, and the constant fight to stay alive. You are walking the game trail at dusk, the air still with the eerie quiet that always comes before a kill. And then, you feel it. The hair rises on your neck before you even know why. Somewhere out there, beyond the trees, something is watching you. Your grip tightens on the spear. You scan the tree line. Nothing. Just the faintest rustle of leaves, a soft crunch of snow under a heavy paw. Then you see it, 2 yellow eyes low to the ground, unblinking. A cat, but no ordinary cat. This one is bigger than you, heavier than 2 men, with canines like polished ivory daggers glinting in the dying light. Smilodon. Saber-toothed death on 4 legs. You back away slowly, not daring to turn. It doesn't move. It doesn't need to. It knows it can wait. The Ice Age was not your world alone. You shared it with apex predators that make modern lions look like house pets. Dire wolves, hunting in packs so large they could strip a carcass in minutes. Short-faced bears, standing over 11 feet tall when upright, faster than you think something that massive should be, and hungrier than anything has a right to be. American lions, larger than any lion that will ever exist again, silent in their pursuit. To walk alone was to court death. To let your fire die out at night was to invite a visit. Even the smaller threats, wolves, coyotes, raptors, had teeth enough to turn a bad day into a last day. So you watched. Always watched. And if you slept light. But not all killers had fangs. Sometimes, the sky itself was your enemy. Blizzards that smothered camps in a night. Rains that swelled rivers until they swallowed the lowlands. The sudden groan and crash of ice as a glacier sloughed off a slab the size of a village. There were no warnings, no forecasts. One bad storm could scatter your band, destroy your food stores, leave you stranded miles from safety. And sometimes, the danger came silently, a winter just a little too long, a spring that never arrived, the creeping hunger that followed. Step back. This wasn't a gentle wilderness. This was a living gauntlet, where survival meant reading the signs, of weather, of predators, of a world that didn't care if you lived or died. And in that world, even other humans could become a danger. Sometimes, as you followed the herds or rivers, you saw other fires on the horizon. Sometimes this meant trade, a friendly exchange of tools, food, or news. Sometimes it meant conflict. 2 bands converging on the same hunting ground could lead to tension that boiled into violence. A stolen cache of dried fish. A trespass across an invisible boundary. A spear raised not for bison, but for another human. There were no armies, no wars as we know them. But there were fights, sudden and brutal, with no one to bury the fallen but the cold earth. And then there were the dangers you couldn't see. Injuries from a hunt that festered. A fever that burned too long. A strange sickness that swept through camp, leaving the young and the old alike gasping for breath. There were no medicines beyond what you could find in the wild. No healers beyond the shaman with their herbs and prayers. And sometimes, even they had no answers. Imagine sitting by the fire at night, knowing these dangers are out there. You tell yourself the predators won't come near the light. You tell yourself the rivers won't rise again. You tell yourself the food will last until spring. But deep down you know, this land shifts beneath your feet. The ice moves. The herds vanish. The seasons change in ways that feel wrong. Something is happening. The elders talk of a time when the world will not be as it was, when the animals will leave and the ice will melt. They say the spirits are restless. You wonder if they are right. And here's the truth, they were. Even as these people fought their daily battles, the climate was changing beneath them. Glaciers were retreating. Seas were rising. Entire ecosystems were beginning to collapse. The great beasts they relied on, the mammoths, the mastodons, the saber-toothed cats, were living on borrowed time. And though they couldn't know it, the age of giants was coming to an end. You wake in the night to a sound, faint, almost imagined. You grip your spear. Listen. The fire has burned low. The shadows beyond the camp seem to move. You can't see them. Not yet. But you know they're there. Waiting. And soon, the dangers will change. The predators will vanish. The world will grow warmer. But survival won't become easier. It will become different, a new challenge, reshaping how these first Americans lived and what they believed. Next, we step into the age of melting ice, when the world itself turned inside out, and the people had to learn how to live all over again. Imagine standing at the edge of a glacier, one that has been there for as long as anyone remembers. It rises like a wall of glass, blue-white and groaning in the morning sun. Then you hear it, a sound like thunder, deep and rolling, except it doesn't come from the sky. It comes from the ice itself. With a shudder, a slab the size of a mountain cracks and falls away, crashing into the valley below. Spray rises like a storm. The air smells of crushed snow and ancient earth suddenly exposed. This is what the end of an age sounds like. Around 12,000 years ago, the Ice Age began to die. The glaciers that once dominated the northern world shrank, pulling back like great beasts retreating to their dens. This wasn't a quiet passing. It was violent. Rivers swelled and carved new paths. Whole valleys flooded as ice dams burst, releasing water with a force that ripped trees from the ground and reshaped entire landscapes. The earth beneath your feet changed, sometimes overnight. Lakes appeared where there had been none. Forests crept northward, reclaiming ground once locked in permafrost. And the air, the very air, grew different. Softer. Warmer. The world you knew, the one your ancestors had crossed for generations, was becoming unrecognizable. This was the beginning of the Holocene, the era we live in today. For the Paleo-Indians, it was both an opportunity and a crisis. The ice retreat opened new lands, fertile, green, teeming with life. But the old patterns of survival were collapsing. The megafauna, those massive Ice Age beasts that had sustained them, were in decline. The mammoths wandered farther and became fewer. Mastodons disappeared from the forests. Even the great saber-toothed cats seemed to vanish like ghosts. The people didn't know they were living through an extinction event. But they felt it. In the empty valleys where herds once grazed. In the long walks between dwindling signs of game. In the slow, creeping hunger that followed. For some bands, the changes were catastrophic. Coastal groups who once followed the shorelines watched their familiar hunting grounds vanish beneath the rising seas. Islands they had camped on for generations were swallowed whole. Inland, the vast ice-free corridors between the retreating glaciers turned into dangerous wetlands, treacherous, shifting ground that slowed travel and swallowed careless feet. The old trails were gone. And the new ones? They had to be discovered, step by uncertain step. The great open grasslands that had once supported mammoth herds gave way to forests of spruce, pine, and birch. Caribou gave way to deer. Bison remained, but their ranges shifted. The people had to learn new hunting strategies, new gathering routes, new ways of reading a land that no longer behaved as it once had. Even their tools began to change. The heavy clovis points once designed for mammoth hunting gave way to lighter, more precise spearheads, an adaptation to smaller, quicker prey. Change wasn't optional. It was survival. Imagine your camp in this new world. The elders talk of the old days, when the herds were so large they seemed to darken the plains, when a single hunt could feed the whole band for a season. But now the fireside stories have a different edge, warnings of a land that no longer gives as it once did, of animals that grow scarce, of paths that lead to emptiness. You don't have the words for it: extinction, climate change, ecological collapse. You just know that the world is slipping away. And this was only the beginning. The great beasts, the mammoths, the mastodons, the saber-toothed cats, were entering their final chapter. Whether it was the warming climate, overhunting by humans, disease, or some cruel combination of all three, they were vanishing. And as they went, they took with them the old way of life. Yet even in this upheaval, there was possibility. The melting opened new frontiers, forests rich with game, rivers full of fish, plant life exploding in places that had once been barren. For those who could adapt, who could trade the spear for the net, the mammoth hunt for the forager's basket, there was hope. But for those who could not, the new world had no place. You stand at the edge of a lake that wasn't here a generation ago. The air smells of wet earth and pine. Somewhere in the distance, a deer lifts its head at your approach, smaller than a mammoth, but enough to keep your people alive. The ice has gone. But the danger? The uncertainty? They remain. And soon, those dangers would come to a head. the great herds would disappear. The age of giants would end. And the people, the first Americans, would have to decide what it meant to survive in a world without them. Next, we faced the great dying, the extinction of the megafauna, and what it cost the people who lived at the edge of their passing. You walk for days and see nothing. No herds on the horizon. No distant trumpeting of mammoths. No bison so thick they seem to turn the grass to earth. Just emptiness. Your people know these paths. You've followed them for generations. But the animals that once made the land feel alive are gone. When you stop at night, the silence is worse than the howls of predators. It feels like the land itself is holding its breath. This is what it must have felt like to live through the great megafaunal extinction, a slow, creeping catastrophe that unfolded around 12,000 to 10,000 years ago. In the span of a few millennia, a blink in geologic time, the mammoths were gone. So were the mastodons, the giant ground sloths, the saber-toothed cats, the short-faced bears, the American lions, the horses and camels of North America. Dozens of species that had ruled the Ice Age vanished. And for the Paleo-Indians, this wasn't an abstract tragedy. It was personal. These animals weren't just food. They were culture, myth, the backbone of life. And their loss left a wound you couldn't name, only feel. But why did it happen? Step back. Look at the evidence. Scientists debate the cause like detectives at the scene of a cold case. 3 main suspects emerge. Climate change. The Ice Age ended, the Earth warmed, and the ecosystems these giants depended on collapsed. The open grasslands shrank, replaced by forests. Waterways shifted. Plants changed. Many of these creatures simply couldn't adapt. Overhunting. Humans arrived, fast, clever, coordinated, and began hunting animals that had never learned to fear us. One spear didn't kill the mammoth. But thousands of spears over hundreds of years? That could do it. A combination, the most likely culprit. The warming climate weakened the giants, fragmented their ranges, and reduced their numbers. Then humans finished what nature started. Some scientists even float other theories: disease brought by migrating animals. Or, controversially, a comet impact around 12,800 years ago, a cosmic spark that may have set the world ablaze. No single explanation fits perfectly. But together they form a picture. This was no accident. It was a convergence of pressures. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Humans were part of this. We see it in the kill sites. The mammoth bones scored with stone tool marks. The caches of Clovis points found alongside butchered remains. We see it in the way spear technology evolved, optimized for efficiency. The people didn't intend to erase a species. They hunted because they had to. But in doing so, they helped tip the scales. And that leads to a question we still wrestle with today. When does survival become destruction? Imagine the conversations around the fire as the herds grew thin. The elders telling of the days when mammoths were everywhere, when mastodons still walked the forests. The younger hunters arguing, maybe quietly, maybe with anger, that there must be somewhere, far away, where the herds still live. But as the seasons pass, hope shrinks. The people begin to whisper, did we do this? Did the spirits take them away? Was it punishment? There are no answers. Only hunger. When the giants disappeared, everything had to change. Hunting shifted from mammoth drives to stalking smaller, quicker animals, deer, elk, bison. Tools evolved. The Clovis points of the mammoth hunters gave way to lighter, more specialized Folsom points for new prey. Foraging became more central. Fishing too. Some groups began building more permanent camps near rivers or lakes. The Ice Age was over. So was the way of life it had shaped. Those who adapted survived. Those who couldn't became stories told in the dark. And here's the hard truth. This wasn't just the end of animals. It was the end of a worldview. When the mammoths vanished, they took with them more than calories. They took the cosmology, the myths, the rhythms of life that had defined these first Americans. In their place came something new, cultures reshaped by scarcity, by movement, by the memory of a world that had been bigger and wilder than the one left behind. The Paleo-Indian became something else. But extinction isn't clean. It leaves echoes. You still see their bones in the earth. You still tell their stories. You still dream of them. The mammoth on the plains, the saber-toothed cat in the tree line, the herds that darken the grass like clouds. The giants are gone. But they don't let you forget them. And so the people changed. New tools. New strategies. New ways of living. From this loss came a transformation, the birth of cultures that would carry their descendants into the next age. Next, we explore that transformation, the evolution of Paleo-Indian life into the fulsome and archaic traditions, and how survival reshaped their world once again. The world feels quieter now. No more distant rumble of mammoth herds. No more roars in the night from predators bigger than your courage. The land you walk looks different. Where once there were endless open plains, now there are forests, spreading, crowding out the grasslands. The wind smells of pine and earth instead of snow and musk. It isn't just the animals that are gone. It's the way of life you inherited from your ancestors. And that changes you. This was the great turning point, when Paleo-Indians began to transform. For thousands of years, their identity had been tied to the hunt of giants. The mammoth wasn't just a meal. It was a way of understanding the world. It shaped their tools, their movement, even their stories and rituals. With the great beasts gone, they faced a question no generation before them had to answer: what now? Their response wasn't a single invention or discovery. It was a reimagining of survival itself. The herds that once fed them were gone. But life didn't disappear, it just looked different. Deer, elk, smaller bison, and antelope became the mainstay of their diets. Instead of the massive group hunts required for mammoths, they developed strategies for quicker, more elusive prey, stalking silently through dense woods, driving herds into natural traps, perfecting lighter and more precise spear points like the Folsom and later Plano types. These weren't just tools. They were a sign of adaptation, of people reshaping themselves to fit the world as it had become. Nomadism remained a way of life, but in some regions, it began to slow. The newly warmed Holocene world offered stability, rivers that teemed with fish, forests rich with nuts and berries, fertile valleys where plants could be harvested year after year. Some bands began returning to the same places seasonally, creating a rhythm of movement that bordered on the beginnings of semi-permanence. They built more substantial shelters. They cached food for the lean months. These were the first faint steps toward a different kind of living, not yet farming, not yet villages, but a life that no longer revolved entirely around the chase. As life diversified, so did human connections. The loss of the great herds meant that no single band could rely solely on its own luck. Trade grew more important: hides for obsidian, dried fish for toolstone, information for survival. Groups began to form networks, loose but vital connections across vast distances, stitching the continent together with exchange and shared knowledge. And from these meetings came more than goods. They brought new stories, new alliances, new bloodlines. In a world that had grown more uncertain, cooperation became as important as the hunt. And what of their spiritual world? When the mammoth walked, it was at the center of their cosmology, a giver of life, a bridge between the people and the world beyond. Now, with the giants gone, the balance shifted. Perhaps the deer took on new sacred roles. Perhaps the rivers and forests became more central in their stories. The old myths didn't disappear, but they evolved, as all living traditions do. Belief had always been a way of explaining survival. In this new world, it had to explain change. Anthropologists see these centuries as the bridge between Paleo-Indian and archaic cultures, a time when people remade themselves in response to a transformed landscape. It wasn't one culture becoming another overnight. It was a slow layering: new tools, new foods, new settlements, new rituals, all built on the memory of what came before. The people didn't stop being Paleo-Indians. They became something broader, the ancestors of countless traditions that would take root across the Americas. Even now, when archaeologists unearth a Folsom Point or find the remnants of an ancient camp, they're not just looking at survival tools. They're looking at adaptation in real time. These were people who stared down the end of their world and found a way to keep walking. They carried with them the memory of the giants, not as a burden, but as a foundation for everything that came next. You sit by the fire in this new age, the forest pressing in where there was once open tundra. You eat venison instead of mammoth. You carve lighter points from stone, adjusting to prey that moves quicker than your grandparents ever hunted. You tell the old stories, but you add to them, shaping them for a world the elders never saw. You are not who you were when the mammoths walked. And that is how you survive. But this story doesn't belong to the Americas alone. While these people adapted to a warming continent, the rest of the world was also changing. New cultures rising, old ones vanishing, the human story branching in every direction. Next, we zoom out. What was happening beyond the Americas while these first Americans were remaking themselves? Imagine stepping back. Not just from the campfire, not just from the forests and plains of this new America, but from the entire continent. Zoom out farther still, until you see the entire Earth at once. The Paleo-Indians are not an isolated people in an empty world. They are part of a far larger current, a great, global turning of the page as humanity moves from one chapter to the next. Everywhere, the Ice Age is ending. Everywhere, people are adapting. While these first Americans are walking their reshaped continent, across the oceans other groups are facing the same crossroads. In Europe, the great reindeer hunters of the Upper Paleolithic are watching the glaciers retreat, their hunting grounds vanishing into new forests. In the Near East, people are beginning to gather wild grains, unknowingly laying the first stones on the long road to agriculture. In Africa, cultures are thriving in lands that bloom where deserts once sprawled. The details differ, but the theme is the same: humanity standing at a threshold, leaving behind the Ice Age world that shaped it. Though they do not know it, the Paleo-Indians are part of a vast web of human movement and transformation. Like their distant cousins across the oceans, they are learning to live in a world that no longer plays by the old rules. And though they will never meet those other peoples, they share something essential with them: resilience. Everywhere on Earth, humans are rewriting what it means to survive. Step back again. It's easy to think of history as separate. The Paleo-Indians over here, the Europeans over there, the Africans, the Asians, as if their stories exist in different books. But they are all chapters in the same one. The warming of the planet, the extinction of great animals, the forging of new tools and traditions, these were global experiences. The first Americans were not behind or apart. They were right there with the rest of humanity, adapting, innovating, enduring. Trade routes are stirring in places they will never see. Languages are evolving. Rituals are changing. The first Americans cannot hear these distant echoes, but they live inside the same story, the story of a species learning to live with a changing Earth. Theirs is not a side note. It is one strand in the great braid of humanity. And though oceans separate them, there is a quiet kinship here. The Paleo-Indian hunter stalking a deer in the North American woods shares something with the fisher casting nets in a newly thawed European river, with the forager collecting wild grains beneath an African sun. They are all asking the same questions. How do we live now? How do we feed our children in this new world? What do we keep of the old ways? And so, though their paths will never cross, their stories rhyme. They are not simply survivors of an ending age. They are the first builders of what comes next. You sit by the fire in this remade world, watching the sparks rise into a sky unrecognizable to your ancestors. Somewhere, across the oceans you will never cross, other fires burn, other voices tell their own stories. You do not know them. But in some quiet way, you are walking together. But even now, with the world warming and cultures transforming, there are shadows in the story. There are questions that remain unanswered, gaps in the tale that no archaeologist or elder can fully fill. Next, we step into the realm of the unknown, the mysteries of the first Americans, and the things about them that may forever stay in silence. Archaeologists kneel in the dirt, brushing away centuries grain by grain, and they find traces, a fluted spear point, a ring of stones where a fire once burned, the bones of a child, carefully buried with ochre and tiny beads. Artifacts. Data. Pieces of a puzzle. But the puzzle is bigger than the pieces. Because the people who left these behind are more than their tools and bones. They had names we'll never speak, songs we'll never hear, prayers we'll never understand. And much of who they were is gone, not lost in the earth, but in time itself. Imagine the words spoken around those fires. The lullabies sung to children, the stories told by elders, the jokes shared over a good meal, the whispered thanks to the spirits of animals before a hunt. All of it, gone. Their languages died unrecorded. Their words live only as echoes in the distant descendants who carry a spark of their speech, though changed beyond recognition. Even if we could stand beside them, would we understand them? Or would their words, shaped by a world we can barely imagine, be as strange to us as the call of a bird we've never heard? We find clues, burials, red ochre, carved figurines. They hint at rituals, at belief in a world beyond the visible. But the full shape of their spirituality? That is theirs alone. What gods did they invoke when the hunt failed? What dreams did the shaman speak of after nights in trance? Did they believe the dead walked with them? Did they see the stars as ancestors, watching from above? We don't know. We can only imagine, and maybe, in imagining, come a little closer to them. We map their migrations with the precision of satellites, tracing the paths they might have walked along ice corridors or coasts now drowned by the sea. But what did it feel like? To take step after step into a land no one had named? To wonder if the horizon held promise or death? To move not for adventure, but because standing still meant hunger, meant extinction? The data cannot tell us. But the silence between the facts invites us to guess. We know their bones. We can model their skulls, even render their faces in clay. But we will never truly know what it was like to look into their eyes. To see the fear of a predator's shadow flicker there. The joy of a successful hunt. The grief of burying a child in frozen soil. We can only imagine their laughter, their anger, their hope. The things that make them not just Paleo-Indians, but people. History is often told as certainty. But here, at the farthest edges of time, we are left with questions. We can measure their tools. We can carbon date their camps. But we cannot hold their thoughts. We cannot know what it meant, truly meant, to live at the dawn of this world. Perhaps that is why their story lingers. Not because we can know everything about them, but because we can't. They are a mirror, reflecting our own need to understand where we came from, and the humility of knowing some answers may never come. When you walk through an old forest, or stand on a plain where the wind carries nothing but grass, listen closely. Somewhere beneath your feet are the ashes of their fires, the bones of their meals, the traces of their lives so far removed they feel like a dream. And yet they are here. Not in the way we want, not in full, not in clarity, but as whispers in the earth. They walk this land before names, before nations. And though their voices are gone, their footsteps remain. And yet, even in that silence, their legacy survives. In the descendants who still walk these lands. In the traditions that echo faintly through the ages. In the archaeologists who kneel in the dirt, still listening for their whispers. Next, we follow those echoes, into the legacy of the first Americans, and how they still live on in the stories of today. If you stand on the plains at night, with only the wind for company, it is easy to imagine them still here. You can almost see their campfires dotting the horizon, hear the quiet hum of voices sharing meat and stories, feel the watchfulness of people who lived with the land, not against it. They are gone. But not entirely. Every trail cut through the wild, every campsite by a river, every whispered prayer to the sky, they left a shape on this continent that has never truly faded. Though their names are lost, their descendants remain. The indigenous nations of North America, with their languages, their ceremonies, their living traditions, are part of an unbroken line stretching back to those first footsteps across the land bridge and along the coasts. The thread may have frayed, but it did not break. Their knowledge, their respect for the land, their understanding that survival is not conquest but harmony, these are not relics of the past. They are living truths. When we think of the Paleo-Indians, it's tempting to see them as ghosts. As figures frozen in time, distant and unreachable. But they were as human as we are. They loved. They feared. They dreamed. They looked at the same stars we see tonight, and wondered about their place in it all. And maybe that's the most important thing they left us, the reminder that we are part of the same story. That across 10,000 years, the human heart hasn't changed as much as we think. You may not carry a stone spear or sleep in a hide tent, but their questions are your questions. How do we live in a changing world? What do we hold on to? What do we let go? When you feel small against the vastness of life, when you look at the horizon and wonder what's next, you are closer to them than you realize. They walked into the unknown, and so do we. Their footsteps are buried now. Their fires are cold. Their voices are only whispers. But the echo of their lives hums quietly beneath our own. It says, we were here. We endured. And because we did, you are here too. And so, their story is not just theirs. It belongs to all of us, a memory of what it means to begin again, even when the world changes beneath your feet. Now let us rest by their fire one last time, and listen as the story fades into the quiet of the night. The fire burns low. The voices of the camp are quiet now. One by one, they've curled beneath their furs, drifting into dreams. The night stretches wide above you, a black velvet sky, stitched with stars. Those same stars they saw. Those same constellations, ancient and unblinking. The wind softens. You close your eyes. You imagine their journey, the endless steps across ice and earth, the courage it took to walk into a land without maps, the stubbornness it took to stay. You imagine their laughter, their prayers, their fire, burning against the cold. And as you drift towards sleep, you carry them with you, these first Americans, these walkers between worlds, who remind us that even at the edge of the unknown, we can keep moving forward. And now, I believe you're already drifting off, so just let the soft crackle of the fire carry you into the sweetest dreams.